have two speakers that are going to share some of Silicon Valley's great stories with us. Initially, Alex Smith was going to join us. He had a family situation interrupt, but we were very, very fortunate to have Ron Johnson join us. Many of you might have met Ron. In prior years, he was the founder of the Apple retail store, sort of reimagined how this world consumer experience may be reimagined for a retailing concept, and launched the Apple stores, and it's been a huge success in the retail world. Similarly, one of the probably most prolific executives in this current generation in Silicon Valley is Nikesh Arora. Among many things, Nikesh was at Google from 2004 to 2014, and most recently has been CEO of Palo Alto Networks, really one of the phenomenal cybersecurity companies in the world. And had we known when he joined that the stock was going to go up 6x over the last 6 years, we all would, our 401ks would be a little bit better. But Nikesh is widely regarded as one of the top CEOs here in the Valley. One common theme that both Ron and Nikesh share is having worked with Bill Campbell. And Bill Campbell, I think, had a significant influence on both their careers. And we're very fortunate to have both of them share some of their stories and perspective with us today. So thank you.
This is Nikesh's first time here.
That's right.
I'm a veteran. I saw a lot of you last night. And how many of you have been here before, like you're an alum? Good for you for coming back. That's great. And let me also just thank Mark. Mark, I'm sure you guys will get a chance to do it, but he pours his heart and soul into this conference every year, works his tail off. It's good for me, though, as his brother-in-law, we play a lot of golf, and his golf game goes way down in the weeks before this. So I like it. But anyway, it's my pleasure. I'm going to introduce you to Nikesh Arora. Flinny just did. Nikesh is a good friend, someone I admire. I've known him for 15 years. Kids went to the same school, live in the same neighborhoods. But as Mark said, today there are a lot of great CEOs in the Valley. He's considered by many people the top of the top. And the reasons are that when you talk to people, he's an exceptional identifier of talent, a recruiter, team builder. Puts together incredible teams, which is not easy to do, right? He's super creative and decisive and can lay out a vision that inspires people to work and delegates well. And then finally, he just is in touch with every little detail. People are kind of intimidated because he knows everything that's going on in the company, even though he flies up here. So he's just big picture, a lot of detail, hugely successful. And so my goal today in helping you get to know Nikesh is kind of figure out what in his upbringing and his career got him to be who he is, so it'll hopefully be helpful to you, if that makes sense. So Nikesh, you grew up in India.
Yes, sir.
Your dad was in the Air Force, and you went to an Air Force school. And then you went to school in Boston, both at Northeastern and BU, correct? Getting your MBA and then MS? BC, yeah. So for most of us, we're developed a lot by the time we're 22, some of the foundational things. So tell us about your upbringing and what were the core things you gained from that?
First of all, thank you, Mark, for having me here. Thank you for the kind words, Ron. And I'm sorry if you guys are expecting Alex Smith. This is the typical bait and switch Mark does. You're stuck with these two guys. So we'll try to do our best Alex Smith sub. Yes. So, Ron, as you said, I grew up in India. My father's in the Air Force, so this is like a long time ago. And at that point in time, the way you went to school was your parents said, you're going to school, and one day he says, well, I've been moved from here to this city. You pick up your bags and you move. You don't stay in the same school, you keep moving. So I think I went to 6 schools by the time I finished high school. And that teaches you about adaptability. You have to keep moving. You have to make new friends every time you go. And something, you don't like it at that point in time, but now it's not a bug, it's a feature. Now it allows us to go into unique situations and trying to find a way to fit in. So it's kind of helpful. He was in the Air Force. And one of the things which we all take away is we take away from our parents things we like to do and things we wouldn't want to do. So you get both. You say, I don't want to be like that, and here's what I want to be. And one of the things which, because of what he did for a living and how he was, he had very high integrity. Mm-hmm. Like when you're a lawyer, when you're a judge, you decide on things all your life, you end up with very high integrity. So whether you see it explicitly or you absorb it implicitly by living in the same house, you learn those values from your parents. I always say you learn your values from your parents and from your companies, because you see how companies operate. You pick up the values, or from your teams. If you're playing sport, you learn the values from your team. So I think over time we all get shaped by where we grow up, and I think a lot of the values that I still appreciate, I want my kids to have, are ones you pick up by living with your parents and understanding how they operate. So
yeah, I agree with that. If I were to bring up anyone from the audience and talk about what shaped them, a lot of these, talented people are in their early 20s, and they would go back to athletics and probably talk about how an experience through a coach, through a team, taught them grit, resilience, teamwork, how to lead, and all that sort of stuff. What kind of experience did you have outside the home in school? Did you play sports? Were you an academic guy?
I'm pretty sure any of these guys could.
But what would you say outside of the home, besides the values you got from your parents, had a huge impact on you?
Well, remember, at that point in time, you're living in a country whose GDP per capita is about $300 a person, right? So it's like 1/100th of the United States at that point in time. So you're always constrained for resources. You play cricket. I can tell you, I tried to play cricket. I tried to play ping pong. And we had one ping pong table for 300 kids who lived in a boys' dorm equivalent. And you had to show up at 6 o'clock, and you don't even know this game, but you have to bounce a ball, and everybody's in a circle. You keep hitting the ball until one person drops, and they're out, and you start again. In the end, 2 people are left. And then you, the winner, plays the third. So you could be there at 5 o'clock, and you wouldn't get a game till 10 p.m. One game of ping pong. So everything was competitive when you start. Everything, you had to go fight your way through it. You'd have one kid who owned a cricket ball, and if he says, my parents are calling me, he says, I'm going back home, I need my ball, and 21 of us would be standing there waiting, say, holy shit, nobody else has a cricket ball. Right. So this is, you learn a few things at that point in time in life. And it's not like somebody else would. We experienced that when we were kids, and it's just par for the course. That's how you grow up. So you get this notion of life is competitive, you have to fight for your place, you have to be good at something to be able to deserve it. So this just gets built into you, because even today people ask me, what keeps you going? Right. Like, you don't need to do this. Which is then simple. That's how I grew up. Right. I don't know any other way.
That's so interesting. Well, it's fascinating because so many of the great CEOs today grew up in India or India descent. You see that Sundar at Google, who you worked with so closely, Satya at Microsoft, Shantanu, yourself. Is it IBM. Kind of that? Yeah. Is it the culture? What is it? Kind of what you're describing, or what can we, as a U.S. system, learn from your upbringing or from your peers?
Well, first and foremost, it's the numbers game, right? We got 1.8 billion people. You only have 300 million. So let's start there. You got 6 times less people competing for those things than we do. Yeah. Then the selection bias is that a lot of the people who went, like we have, at that point in time, 1 million kids would take the exam to get into engineering school, and only 2,000 of us would get in. So now you're down to less than 1% of the people. Right. And then of those people, 5% of them would make it here. Right. So you're talking about, for the last 30 years, we've had probably 300-400 of the best Indian engineers come into this country on a very consistent basis. Got it. I'm worried that a lot of them didn't make it. Yeah. Very few of us made it to be CEOs. I'm wondering where happened to the rest of them. So right. I think joking. So
no, that's really interesting to me. When you made the decision to go to school in Boston, were you looking at alternatives, or what was the driver?
It's going to sound very sort of interesting. Yeah. But as part of the whole resourceful thing, you were allowed to spend $100 outside of India applying to schools. Yeah. So we had to find schools which had 0 admission fees. That's pretty straightforward. So if you applied to Wharton, which wanted $49 to apply to process your application, you had to find 5 other schools which had $0 admission fee.
Right.
So all of us used to have lists of schools which had $0 admission fees because you can only total $100. And then you had to find schools who were willing to sponsor some part of your education because, at that point in time, I think Wharton asked me for $18,000, and my father's net worth was $5,000, so it wasn't going to work out. And Northeastern said, if you come teach computer science, we'll pay your tuition. So it became pretty straightforward. $0 university, pay half my tuition. This is not a hard problem to solve.
Yeah.
You get on a plane, you show up there.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up at Northeastern.
That's really interesting. So you graduate with your MBA, and it's time to pursue your career. A lot of people here are just finishing up school. How do I do it? You decide to go in finance, stay in Boston, starting with Fidelity. Did that for about a decade, correct?
I did that about 5 years. Yeah.
5 years. So tell us
Then went to
about
Putnam, yes.
tell us about that choice, and would you do it again? What you got from it?
Yeah, look, in 1992, you may not remember, there was a big recession. It was hard to find jobs. So I rented a Mac. And at those times, there's no LinkedIn, there's no social media. So you literally found an old printed directory of all the alumni from Northeastern or Boston College, wherever you could find them, and you printed 400 letters and sent them to those people. Sometimes I think I sent 12 letters to different people at Fidelity. I think 10 of them said no. I think about 450 letters I mailed out. This is in 1992, and I graduated off my class, still. I still have them. I have 430 rejections, all printed, lying in a box in my house, and once in a while I'm moving house or cleaning, I find them, I still keep them. They all said, no, you're not worthy. In fact, and I ran into Glenn Hutchins, if you know him, right, at Silver Lake. I have a letter from him signed saying, you don't make the cut.
Wow.
And I'll come back to the story, but they'd hired me as an advisor. I was like, you could have had me a lot cheaper 25 years ago. Yeah. So I applied to a lot of jobs. I ended up working at Fidelity. But when I was graduating from school, they told me I couldn't get a job on Wall Street because Northeastern wasn't famous for its finance sort of concentration.
Right.
So I went to Boston College at nights, and I got myself a CFA.
Yeah.
And in 1997, I was teaching a CFA class to a bunch of portfolio managers, and this guy says to me, oh, you work at Fidelity. Do you know this guy? How much money do you manage? I'm like, I don't manage money. I'm like a corporate finance geek. I add numbers. And the guy says, I manage $8 billion, and you're teaching me how to do foreign exchange hedging? That's bizarre. I said, I have a CFA and you don't. Would you like one? He's like, yes. I said, please sit down and pay attention. So that's how I ended up at,
Wow.
To his credit, the next morning I got a call from a recruiter from Putnam, which is where he used to work, saying, this guy's the wrong job. Let's get him to come here and help manage money. So I managed money for 3 years. It was boring, but
But you did it.
it paid well, yes.
Yeah. And then you decided you wanted to go into operate. Is that when you made the big shift in the career?
Yeah, in 1999, some of you, if you remember, we had this thing called the internet bubble. All you had to do was find a domain name that said .com, and you could take it public as quickly as you could, and those things would go up 20x or 40x. So it's like you're sitting there managing money, and things were trading like crazy. So then I say, how does this make sense? So at that point in time, I ran into the CEO of Deutsche Telekom, who took a liking to me, and he says, you should come work for me. So it was not far from Boston to Bonn, so I decided to take a job in Germany.
Yeah. So that's it. Was that your first real international work experience?
Unless you call U.S., I don't know. Apart from India, I think U.S. was my first international work experience, but yes, going to school here, that was my first non-U.S. work experience.
But you go from being an analyst, kind of a finance or investor, to being an operator, and you had to create something and hire a team.
Yes.
How was that transition without a lot of experience? Or?
Well, I had to hire a team at Fidelity when I was in finance, and I'm still in touch with my first employee who I hired. Is a very good friend of ours, and he was sitting next to me in class in Boston College, and I said, "Listen, I got my first manager job. I got to hire somebody else. Do you know how to use Excel?" He's like, "Oh yeah, it's as good as my Spanish." I said, "This is great."
Right.
That's kind of his job interview. So he went and talked to a few other people, and he started working with me. About a month in, I was beginning to question his Spanish skills. because the cell wasn't that great. And then I hired the first 3 people, and that was my first mistake. I realized, the first transition, and this we don't teach in any school, right? We're all taught to be really good at what we do. We get really good at what we do, and we know how to win, for the most part, as ourselves. Maybe the only exception is team sports. You don't learn that in a class, you learn that on the field. How do I win together with 5 other people? But in class, you learn how to be really good at what you can do. And for the most part, it's based on your competence. But when you have to make 5 people do great things, so our mental model is, this is how I won, therefore I have to teach Ron how to win like me. We don't pay attention on how does Ron win, because he wins differently, I win differently. So in my first job, I ended up hiring 3 people who were very much like myself, and see if 4 of us could do the work of 4 people really great. And the 2 people we hired who were not quite like ourselves used to think they're not good enough. But that's where you forget not every project is the same, and you're going to get a project where you need Ron's way of winning, not Nikesh's way of winning. So the question is, how do you surround yourself with people that you can win in different circumstances? And you learn that much better in sports, playing different teams, and certain times you need a lot of good defense, sometimes you need better offense, depending on the other team. And similarly in management, you have to find the circumstances in the right team that's going to help you win in multiple circumstances. But my first blind spot was I thought, every circumstance is the one I know how to win in. I should surround myself with people like myself. I think you can pick your favorite sports analogy. You can't have 5 power forwards and play basketball or whatever sport you choose. So
That's an interesting insight. So you work in Germany for 3 years or so.
Well, I lived in London, I worked in Germany.
London to Germany. But then as Mark said, 2004 comes. I've been at Apple for 4 years.
Yes.
And you joined Google. And was that pre or post IPO?
That was 2 months after the IPO.
2 months after the IPO.
Google was an $18 billion company.
Right.
And they were looking for somebody to run Europe.
Yeah. And how did they find you? How did you find them? How did that?
Well, I was living in London and flying to Bonn every Monday and coming back Thursdays. And for those of you who don't know Bonn, it used to be the capital of Germany. And the joke is it's half the size of the Chicago cemetery and twice as dead. So and I did not want to spend my 30s in Bonn. So I decided this is time for me to give up and not work in Germany. So I was in London. And a friend of mine who used to run a mobile company said, I got a call from a headhunter, and they're looking for somebody to run Google Europe. My job's too big. This is a small job. They have 400 people who work here. Yeah. This guy used to run 10,000 people in the UK for a mobile company. He said, well, maybe you want to talk to them. Yeah. So I was busy writing business plans to see if I wanted to do a startup. Yeah. So I ended up meeting a very good friend and my boss for 5 years, Amit, in a sort of rented office in Soho. And he said, you're the 47th person I'm talking to. Wow. I'm like, wow. And I said, what do we need to do to make it the last? He said, well, you have to meet Larry and Sergey and all the people who work here, 5 people. I said, one condition, I want to meet them first and these 5 people later. And it so happened that Larry and Sergey were visiting London like a month later. Yeah. And he set up a meeting for me to meet them. And for some strange reason, my meeting with Sergey was in the British Museum, not in the office. And this is his sort of wisdom. We had talked about the office, and I said, this office is extremely unimpressive. Why would you have such an unimpressive office in London when you're supposed to be this hot tech company from Silicon Valley? So that stuck with him. He says, I'm not bringing him back here. So Sergey and I walked around the British Museum, and I'd gotten there 5 minutes early. So I was in the gift shop walking around. Like, museums are not my thing or my wife's thing. We don't like to spend time in museums. But I was just sitting in the gift shop, and there's this like stone everywhere they were selling. It's called the Rosetta Stone. And I was just standing there reading about it, and it was used for translation, in Egyptian times. Yeah. And me and Sergey are walking through the museum, and bang, suddenly we almost walk into this large stone called the Rosetta Stone. I said, oh, what's that? I'm like, that's the Rosetta Stone. It's like, well, what is that for? I'm like, it was used for translation. Trust me, that was the only thing I read in the gift shop. You could have walked around the entire museum. I had no idea what was going on, but I seemed to know that. And then we started talking about Google Translate and the potential for computers to translate languages much faster. So I think that led to me joining Google and running Google Europe for 5 years.
That's great. Were you inspired? Like when I met Steve, I was inspired. I mean, it was just, I had never spoken to someone who was as stimulating, challenging, thinking 10 years out, and it made me want to work with him because I would just get that pleasure of doing that. Did you feel that with Larry? Because I've met them both, and they're kind of engineers, kind of geeky, kind of product people. Were they inspiring in the way? Because you're a very inspiring guy.
Look, it's like, at that point, we reached that stage in our lives where I said, we got to figure out what makes them tick and what makes them successful.
Right, right.
And what Larry and Sergey would talk about was so intellectually alien to me, because that's not how my brain works. Or when you talk to Elon or you talk to Zuckerberg, these guys are like way out there in the way they think about the world and the way they see the world unfold. Like, I still remember meeting Larry on my one-on-ones, and he'd say, Bill Campbell tells me you do a good job at running the business. If I had a few extra hours, I'm sure I could find ways to make you do better, but I'm not interested in what you do. Let's talk about, what if we had these vacuum-sealed tunnels instead of the 101, and all the cars went there, you'd be able to move 200 miles an hour, and we have off-ramps, there'd be no accidents. I'm like, okay. I was thinking, what's going to happen to the 101? I'm like, I can't think like that. One time, Larry and I were flying from here to Spain because he was getting an award, and he was going to take me back to Europe. And literally, we're flying, taking off from Moffett, and literally taking off. And he's like, look at the traffic down there.
Right.
I'm like, yes. He's like, what if we had flying cars? You'd have degrees of freedom would be a lot more, then you wouldn't need roads. And he did invest in two flying air taxi companies, one in New Zealand and another one, because like, so they don't think about linear ways of solving problems. They think of non-linear ways of solving problems. And in the same trip, we're talking about mapping. So my job, one of my things that I had to do for Google was go sign a deal with every cartographic authority in the world to get access to maps. It was painful. You had to go to Czech Republic and say, give us all your maps. I'm like, no, you can't have our maps. We'll pay you money. No, you can't have our maps. These are national property. Dude, they're maps. Like we have A to Z, like in the UK. So you had to buy these maps. And I was chatting with Larry about it. Larry's like, you know what? How many kilometers of roads are there in the world? Sort of like trying to Google the answer. It's like, then he's sitting there saying, if he took the number of kilometers, how fast does a car move? Something like that. So I was like, if he took cars, put cameras on them, and just visually mapped everything, it would take 800 drivers and 1,600 cars. He did the math. Like, that's like $25 million. Why are we wasting our time buying these maps? Let's just have people drive cars. So the first time, the way Google did maps was we drove cars everywhere. And then we had rickshaws in Rome on streets where you couldn't drive cars. And the first version of Google Maps was where like people was like, take the picture of my wife's sunbathing in our backyard off Google Maps. that was the biggest problem we used to have. Like, we'd be driving past people's homes and people were doing strange things. And like, I saw my car on Google Maps. It has my car's registration number. So we had to go like scrub a whole bunch of that stuff out. And if you see today's maps, like there was a time you had to go beg the authorities to give you a copy of the map. And now, you don't leave your house without an Apple Maps or Android Maps or whatever you choose, Google Maps, right? So these guys just think about life very non-linearly. Yeah. And I remember Larry recounting a conversation with Steve Jobs, where Larry came back and said, I met with Steve. So we all said, so what did he tell you? He says, well, Steve said, you're too distracted. You're doing too many things. You should focus. Look at Apple. We focus. We build amazing things. And then we focus on the next thing. We build amazing things. And then Larry says, no, we believe in the chaos theory of innovation. If you try 50 things, 30 of them are going to be great. It's just a matter of people and money. So they both have very different philosophies of how to approach life. And Steve, I don't know him, but I got to see him once. But very different philosophy, but yet they found success in their own way.
We're all different. You talked about Bill. So when did you meet Bill, and what impact did he have on your career?
Yeah, Bill, I met Bill the first time, I flew over from Europe. I used to run Europe, and I spent 5 years running half of Google here, but my first trip, I got to meet Bill. And Bill would sit in Google's management meeting and make sure he was mentoring the two founders and work with Eric. And I'm sitting there, I wore my nicest jacket, and I walk into the room, and there's Sergey on the floor on a back massager.
Now, how big a team was in this meeting?
This is like about 8 people.
8 people, yeah.
And because I was visiting from Europe, I was allowed to come sit in the meeting, and I'm like sitting there, it's like, I see Larry, where's Sergey? Oh, he's back there. He's got an Indonesian massager he's found on the internet, and he's massaging himself in the back. And so this is interesting. I used to work for a German company where you had to wear a tie, and we had literally people interpreting because the German for English. So here I am, this management meeting says, the back, that's interesting. And Bill's sitting there, Eric's sitting there, and we're talking about Android. Those of you who knows Android phones, and talk about buying the company. So this is great. I worked in a mobile company for 5 years. I covered mobile stocks for 5 years, so I have 10 years of knowledge. So Eric says to me, what do you think about this company? I'm like, well, we're trying to build an operating system. There are 300 people who've tried it before. It hasn't worked. So great, good input, thank you. So I go back to Europe.
What year was this?
This is 2005, okay. February 2005.
This is right after Eric had joined the Apple board.
That's right.
Saw the iPhone prototype and wanted
anyway,
to buy Android.
I don't know about that. So if you had seen the Apple phone, we'd have built a much better Android phone. So let's talk about that. So 2005, so I go back, and then I get a note saying we bought this company called Android. So I called Bill Campbell. I said, Bill, this is weird. You asked me for my opinion. I've done so much time in mobile, and you disregarded my opinion. I thought it wasn't a good idea. I'm glad they did. And Bill says to me, we like to hear people's opinions, but in the end, we're going to do what we're going to do. So he was like, the first time, he was beginning to inculcate me into Google, and since then, he was very helpful. He called me in 2009 and said, listen, your boss is retiring. We want you to come take his job. And he was very instrumental in my being able to move here. He's very instrumental in helping my kids get to school. He was so helpful on a constant basis. And you learn from him that he was almost like, I think something that was very interesting that changed. So in 2014, when I left Google, I went to Larry and said, Larry, I've been here for 10 years. I want to do something different. Either you give me something different to do, or I want to go do something else. And Larry said, go talk to Bill. So Bill took me to lunch down the street in Menlo Park. And that whole conversation was not about Google or about what Google needed, even though Bill was representing Google. It was about me. He's like, I'm past trying to make Google happy. I want to make sure Nikesh is going to have a good life going forward. So he spent so much time thinking about me, talking about me. So he was amazing. He was his own man. He was like somebody who cared about people deeply and was always there to help people. So that was amazing.
Yeah, he just valued building community and relationships. Throughout my life, he was so supportive, because he was on the Apple board when I joined Apple. He really helped us, get behind the stores and get the board support for that. He helped my kids. He coached my son Will in football. I remember when I made that very difficult decision to go to JCPenney, he came over to the house, spent 2 hours trying to talk me out of it. And I should have listened, but it was...
I listened to him. He said he should leave Google, so I did.
Same thing. But he cares so much about people.
He does.
And is that a trait that you've carried forward in some ways?
I'm getting better at it.
Yeah.
I can't say that I'm anywhere close to... I aspire to be better at it, so I'm trying to get better at it, but it's hard.
Yeah. But you know everybody, it seems. Like when I'm with you, like on a golf course, when there's a couple groups overlapping, you seem to know everybody, you take time to really connect with people.
It's kind of interesting. When you're young, you don't value a lot of the stuff which you learned growing up and getting older. It's like you don't value the relationships, you don't value the network. We become somewhat transactional. You realize life is long, and eventually, when you want people to be there for you when you need them, but that starts by you being there for them when they need you. And you have to do it in somewhat of a zero expectation format. You just have to help people because you can,
Right.
not because you want something from them.
Right.
And if you ever need them, they'll be there for you.
Right. That's great. Well, we're going to get tight on time, and I want to make sure we stay on schedule. But give us a quick update. You went to SoftBank?
Yes.
At a really big time. I mean, SoftBank was the big. They had all the money, making all these
Yes.
investments. Were in
Yes.
Masa, and you went in there as the chairman, chief operating officer, president, all that stuff.
Yes.
And then you left and ended up not. How was that experience? What?
Well, I worked for 2.5 years for one of the, I'd say, the craziest investors of all time.
Yeah.
This is a man called Masayoshi Son, who's Japanese. I think he went to Berkeley. He was the richest man in the world for 88 days in 1999 when the internet was like crazy. And he's also a very nonlinear thinker. He's not building things, but he's nonlinear thinking in the way he invests. And one thing you learn from people like him is, all of us get, we get risk minimized as we grow up. For those of you who have kids, and my kids are sitting in the back, they're young, we're constantly telling our kids to de-risk. It's like, don't cross the road, hold my hand, don't do this, don't eat that. And think about it, we're all trying to make sure we're protecting our children, and actually you're constantly de-risking them, right? Because you're trying to say, that's crazy, don't jump in the water, you don't know how to swim. Like everything that we do as parents because we're trying to protect our kids. But as we go through life and you get married, well, don't have a big mortgage, don't take that much risk, you have kids. So we're constantly risk minimizing ourselves. Now, if you go to finance theory tells you high risk, high return, right? Zero risk, zero return. So the question is, what's the right level of risk we should accept in our lives? This man has zero concept of risk, zero. Like he was the richest man in the world, he went down to $1 billion. He went and borrowed $19 billion and bought a $20 billion company, turned to 60. He goes all in every time, like never play poker with this guy. And he finds the money every time.
Right.
So he's still worth a lot of money, but you learn, like he's the youngest, and from a risk perspective, he's the youngest 60-year-old I know from a risk management perspective. He just has crazy risk appetite. It's just, somebody just punched him in the face outside, and he comes and say, all right, let's do it again. Yeah. So you just learn, oh my God, like how do you deal with that kind of risk? So he's amazing from that perspective. I did that for 2.5 years, and I was home, and
Right.
Palo Alto Networks found me.
Right.
I knew nothing about cybersecurity 6 years ago.
Right.
I still don't. But.
Well, why don't we turn it over to the audience for questions? We have about 10 or 15 minutes, please. Why don't you go first, if you'd like to? Or get a mic. Thank you.
Nikesh, thank you for your time. I don't know a whole lot about cybersecurity myself, but I have been a shareholder ever since I saw Nancy Pelosi bought some calls. I do have a question for you about the recent situation with CrowdStrike.
Yes.
What's your take on that? I know there's a lot more risk out in the cybersecurity space with AI, the development of hackers getting more sophisticated. So how do you guys address that, and what do you think the future holds from that point of view?
Oh, wow, that's like he's going all in. So. For those of you who don't know, Nancy Pelosi bought some shares, and it was on Twitter and the internet, so our stock got a little boost thanks to her. And clearly, we got a new set of shareholders. So thank you. Most recently, for those of you who may not have heard, I think a lot of the airports were shut down for a day or 2 or 3, and CrowdStrike. So what happens in cybersecurity is that almost every corporate PC enterprise server has some sort of protection software running to make sure that bad guys don't get in. Now, it's like sort of a cat and mouse game because every time you solve a way to stop them, they're looking for a new way. So cybersecurity companies have to send constantly updates to these protection software to make sure that we give it the most latest way to protect against a new threat. That's kind of what goes on. Now, Microsoft has a unique situation because you take your iPhone, you take your Mac, the device doesn't let you in until it's fully ready and booted. Microsoft lets you talk to it while it's still waking up, which means if you can get in there, you can take over the device. So CrowdStrike pushed an update into that segment of the Microsoft devices, and they made a mistake, and 8.5 million devices crashed and stopped. These are all the way from Delta's pilot application, where their pilots didn't know which planes they were flying, to all the screens in most airports. So pretty much the world slowed down for 3-4 days. It was not a hacker, it was just a bad software push. It just tells you that as we get more and more connected, every company, everybody is putting in more technology. Not every piece of software is perfect, which means you have to make sure there's good protection around it, which is good for our business in a way. It's like, so it's a good thing you bought the stock because we're in a business where nation states are trying to get in, North Korea, China, Russia, even some parts of the Middle East. They have phenomenally better offensive technology than they have defensive technology. So they're out there. Because you think about it at a broader level, we engage in wars, and wars require really expensive things to be shot at other people, lives are at stake. If the theory is that in the future, if you could cripple a city's water supply, or you could shut down the electrical grid, you could cause chaos in cities. I don't have to be there. I can do that remotely. So we think the future wars are going to be fought in the cyber world, not in the physical world, because it's a lot easier. I mean, think about it. I think Colonial Pipeline was shut down because they hacked it. With enough persistence, enough focus, enough resources, most things can be brought down the world because it's like we don't have that much defense going on in every water system in this country. So it's going to be interesting.
More questions, please.
Hi, Doug White, University of Massachusetts, fellow Commonwealth educated guy over here. Question for you about kind of your early to mid-career post grad school. How'd you navigate those next opportunities? It seems like there was some push-pull. People came to you, they wanted to recruit you away, but how active were you in pursuing, I don't want to go that route, I want to go this route? And how did you kind of socialize that and build some momentum for yourself to obtain those opportunities?
That's a good question. Look, some of them were serendipitously showed up, but it doesn't mean they show up. You still have to grind through them and convince them that you're the right person for the job. You have to, so my philosophy has always been you have to bring half the skills from your last job into the next job and hope that you learn the other half of the new job. The last thing I ever want to do is do exactly what I did in my last job and my next job. So if you look at cybersecurity, I didn't know cybersecurity, but I know enough about managing large teams and large businesses. So I brought that capability, but I learned cybersecurity in current part of my life. When I went from Fidelity to Putnam, I brought my financial skills, but I'd never managed money before. So I've always looked for opportunities where you could bring some stuff with you to the place. And I always say that when you do what you do, you have to do it to the best of your ability and do it sort of in a first principle way, and hopefully people around you recognize. Sometimes you get invited by people you worked with who liked you in one job, and they'll tell you, hey, Doug, I really enjoyed working with you at company A, but my company B has a new opportunity which you'd be great for, or sometimes your managers transition. So it kind of ends up being very dependent on, eventually there's a bit of a luck factor that gets involved in you finding the opportunity. Right time, right place.
If you had to pick out the breakout moment for you, like what part of your career that just gave you that chance, you're at the right place, right time, right job, would
Has to be Google, right?
Be Google.
Has to be Google. There's a small $18 billion company which does something called search. My first year, in 2004, I had to go to companies. I remember I tried to meet the CEO of Marks and Spencer. And I was at Google. Google did $2 billion of revenue around the world, and the UK, like, there's no online advertising. Now online advertising is like $250 billion at Google and $200 billion at Meta. It's like, at that time, the whole online advertising was $4 billion in the world, and Google had half of it. Now it's $450 billion. So nobody knew where it was. So I went to try and see him, and meetings often get canceled. So I go see him. He's in his late 50s at that point in time. So he says, well, I was about to cancel our meeting. I'm like, then? He's like, and I was looking at my schedule, talking to my assistant, and my daughter was sitting there, who's 17. And I said to my assistant, cancel this Google meeting, I don't know what it is. And she's like, that sounds like the only interesting meeting that is on your schedule. Why would you cancel it? So I got that meeting because his daughter knew about Google. And he says, tell me, what does Google do? So literally, I kid you not, I had opened a laptop and I was showing him how search works. He's like, oh, that's cool. Let's try something. And it's like, he's typing, searching for something else. It's like holiday in Tuscany. It's like, wow. So my job in 2004 was to teach people how to search. So that was I think that was the most right time, right place opportunity.
Right place. It's funny. When I was at Apple, the first day I met Steve, we spent 3 hours that night. I'm heading back to Minneapolis. And he said, well, can you send me an email, like with a document on what you do if I gave you this job to create the stores. And I said, well, I would, but I don't have a computer. So you look back, 2000, less than half of Americans had computers. I worked at Target. We didn't have email. We had some mainframes. The world changed so quickly. And then Steve said, well, look, I can send you a computer. And if you have trouble setting up, I'll send a guy to you. And I said, then you've got a problem. It's either me or your computers. But it shows how quickly the world has changed. Now, this is 23 years ago. It just speeds up and up and up and up. And so what advice would you give, given how rapidly things change? How would you advise people to be prepared, to be constantly open to the next thing, to be learning about the next thing? Yeah, you took control of your own career getting your CFA, when you were in a job. Any advice?
Yeah, look, first of all, I think you guys already have a head start, almost every one of you. Because when we hire people, we look for people who know how to persevere. We look for people who know how to sacrifice. We look for people who know how to focus and win. And I think anybody who's tried to be a professional athlete or college level athlete, you've learned that. You know the times you were not allowed to go out drinking with your buddies because you had practice at 4 o'clock in the morning. So you know how to sacrifice. You know how to go achieve something. You know how to want to go win every morning when you wake up. That's half the battle, to be honest. That's what we look for. We look for people who want to step up and go out and win. And you'll be surprised, a lot of people who don't play sport at the highest level don't have that sort of grit and that upbringing. As you said, you get, by the time you're 22, 24, a lot of your values, a lot of your behaviors are formed. And for those of you who have been playing sport from a very early age, you've learned that it's implicit in your personality. Right. That's hard to take away from you. So you guys have a phenomenal head start from that perspective, because that's what we try and teach people in the professional world who haven't been through that rigor. Like, well, people say, shit, I'm just going to sit and keep doing this till I'm done. I'll grind 80 hours because I know how to grind. So I think that's kind of an amazing, sort of great start for them. And I will say one thing, culturally in India, when we come from, you say, oh, let's get all the learning done and then we'll go do all the doing. But that's the wrong way to think about it. Like, think about this. Ron and I had to learn how to use computers. I used to sell computers. My first job, I had to learn how to use computers. I'll send an email and call somebody and say, did you get my email? That was the time. Email will get there, buddy. It always does, right? So we went through mobile phones. We went through mobile applications. I remember, my father not wanting to learn how to video chat because, like, I'm done. I don't want to learn this stuff. Imagine if I'd stopped learning how to video chat and I wouldn't know about Zoom. I wouldn't know about mobile phones. So I learned cybersecurity and I'm learning AI. So the only thing is, the world will keep changing around us very fast. Make sure you have enough knowledge about what people are talking about. Don't ignore it. Because it's very easy to ignore things. I've spent the last 6 months reading every tweet, everything I can put my hands on in AI, understanding possibly even a third of it, not even the rest of it. But well, I'm a third smarter than I could have been on AI.
That's great. Please.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here on a Saturday. Noticing your beautiful family behind us. What's one characteristic that you'd want to share and that you're most proud of with your kids?
My kids, as I said to you earlier, as children, we all absorb the values of your parents when we live at home. And my wife does an amazing job of imbibing those values in my kids. They're very good kids. They are somewhat disciplined to the extent they need to be, but at the same time playful and adventurous and curious on a constant basis. And my son has decided he wants to be an NBA player. He's pretty resolute on that. I just hope he gets the height from his dad, and he puts in the hard work to get there.
That's great. Thank you. Well, thank you, Nikesh. This was wonderful. I've known you a long time. I learned a lot. I'm so impressed with how you took control of your own life, career. The early days, you made this happen, and it's very impressive.
But guys, if I had the opportunity of doing this in reverse, you'd learn how amazing Ron is, because Ron's done some amazing things in life, and he also has an amazing family and does an amazing job bringing up the kids. So Hopefully we did our best Alex Smith sub for you
There we
guys.
go, there we go. Thanks.